Hi there. Thank you for downloading, listening to, and watching the Lean Into Artcast. This is a show. This is a podcast. This is a video cast where a couple of visual storytellers get together and take on various topics that tend to cross one's path. When you go on this endeavor of communicating with images, we think hard about this stuff, so you will too. My name is Jerzy Drozd. I am a cartoonist and teaching artist, and the other host is named.
Hey, I'm Rob Stenzinger. I'm an interactive designer, maker, and I'm a podcaster too. Hi, Jerzy.
That's true. We're both podcasters. Yeah, I'm going through my self-introduction in a very rote way because I have another job now. I'm a cartoonist and teaching artist and festival director. Like that's like my job, right? Like I get paid to do this now, so I should be listing that as one of my qualifications or one of my occupations. How are you? Here we are, episode 330 in October. How you feeling?
Well, I like this time of year. My birthday is around this time of year, so pretty positive associations with it. The leaves are changing. This is when fall, the season of autumn happens around where, in our hemisphere. I know we share that in common. So it's not just in Minnesota in the United States where I'm at, but it's it's a neat time of year. I like this change. There's this change in the air always, and it's hard not to be affected by that.
Agreed. I mean, and then even like when we were children, this is when like the new school year is like just underway too. So there's that excitement as well. As a kid who, at least elementary school and middle school, I pretty much enjoyed them. High school was like, that's a little bit of column A and column B on that one. But elementary school I really liked. And so like autumn always makes you think of like, I'm going back to school, going to see all my friends again and all that stuff too. But then yes, there's what we're going to be talking about today. The topic is Halloween and spooky stories. This is a time to celebrate some, creepy things, some maybe a little bit of like dark humor and at least in my case, like sort of elevated mythological stories involving monsters that somehow, one way or another, point to some of our condition as human beings, right? But
I think there's a pretty natural fit that of like why do we get creepy this time of year in a season like this? So
yeah,
right on.
I think we were talking about this recently too. I can't remember where I had this conversation. So I recently bought a house in Columbus, where I now live, Columbus, Ohio, and one of the search criteria is like, do kids trick or treat in this neighborhood? Like that was one of the things I was really hung up on, and like I didn't realize how important it was to me until I got to conversations with people about it. Like, well, why is that so important? And I'm like, well, there's something really magical about kids getting dressed up as something else, and I get to make a huge fuss over them. I get to give them candy and say like, oh my gosh, you're so scary, or oh my gosh, you're so cool, here, have some candy. And I just go to the next house and get fussed over and told how cool you are. Probably not going to happen this year, but it's still, that is part of the excitement of this time of year too, is like just the whole dressing up as like what you play acting, right? That's fun too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's like as a kid and at different stages as an adult, I've had time to do the that kind of yearly dress up. It's like cosplay hasn't been a just like a frequent thing for me. I don't do theater. I don't do like a variety of outlets where one would get a chance to to dress up, which I guess, that's interesting. I mean, I could have put more into meeting friends to play Dungeons and Dragons, right? I could have, in other role-playing games, like I guess I could have dressed up more, but this is so I guess this is the big obvious opportunity to do that. And so, but yeah, it's which I guess more excuse for fantasy, more collective playfulness, and there's a lot of ingredients that go toward this being like a time that feels different. It feels different than September. It feels different than November, right? Like
Yeah.
October is its own thing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and so for those who are watching live, we're going to talk about some of our favorite spooky and monster stories from various platforms, like whether they're movies or books or comics or video games, even. Feel free to share your own in the chat while we're talking about it. But the thing I always tell my students in my classroom, but you got to tell me why. Saying just because is not a reason. That's I won't accept that reason as why you like something. You got to give me some evidence, some rationale. Point to one thing that makes you say, that's why this thing is cool. Because Rob and I are going to do that too. That's the very lead and tardy way to approach this stuff, right? So are you ready to kick over to it?
Yeah. Let's get into our spooky stories.
I kind of wish I had some scary music loaded up, but I'll just go with the scream.
My toe.
So
that's a classic.
we are now in the episode. So well, where do you want to start? You want to pick one first? We both have our lists to go through of scary stories. And I thought in this first part we would just describe them. Like, so we're making the pitch. Here's what it is and what it's about. And then maybe in the second part of the show we can talk about, like, why do these stories in particular grab us the way they do? Like, can we point at one thing at each of them that says, like, okay, that's why this particular kind of spooky story gets to me. Because this is something where, also, for me at least, as somebody who's very, I would say I have a kind of a reputation for being pretty rated G. Like, wow, really, Jerzy, you like scary movies? Like, that's interesting. Like, well, let's be clear. There's a certain kind I like. Like, I don't. Like, I've never seen any of the Saw movies because I know the moment I heard what it was about, I was like, not for me. I don't want to see that. But like certain kinds I can get super into. And I even enjoy being frightened by them. But now I'll pitch it over to you and see, where do you want to start? Pick one of yours and let's hear about it.
Oh gosh. Well, it's hard to not get a little bit meta, because I'm going to list things that are pretty old for the most part.
Okay.
And the reason, there's reason behind that. It's like I've never been sort of like one who to hugely embrace the extreme stuff, right? Like as much gore and scary as one could get, even as a kid who grew up in the 80s. Like if it was really super gory, I probably wasn't gonna make that a priority. But just a little bit and fairly violent and stuff like that, to have like some elements that are intense, and it is a kind of ride. And I we'll go into that later, but like that kind of intensity and ride was less compatible with my partner I chose. So Kate Shield Stensingers, but she's been on the show. We do another show together called Art and Science Punks, and she's super not into it. Like a classic in our relationship is the story of how and I've never been an intense movie buff, but just I like to understand stories and like to understand the mechanisms people use and their intentional choices and stuff. So I'll read a little bit of background and feel a little extra informed and excited. Like I watched Gladiator in the theater a few times. I enjoyed that movie. It's pretty violent, but in that I was into like that range of violence, and yet I read an article and it was like, hey, guess what? It got a PG-13 rating because all of the stuff happens slightly off frame. And I was like, it does? I'm going to go watch it again. And then I did, and I was like, oh, I can watch this with Kate. No, I couldn't. Nope. Like, oh, check it out. This really thoughtful article explained, and what I told her, and I'm like, I sold her, and I'm like, it was a terrible movie watching experience. Seeing how the effect it had on her. And I was like, wow, I made a huge mistake.
So it is the opposite in my marriage. So Ann and I went to see Event Horizon when we were dating. Are you familiar with that movie? It's a science fiction.
I love that movie.
Oh my gosh, the whole time in the theater, like actually it was about like 4 minutes in, fingers in my ears, eyes closed, knees up like this. The whole movie, I'm just doing that. I'm like, this is too much. This is too much. And Anne is laughing at it. She's like, this is so dumb. This is so ridiculous, over the top. I cannot believe that you were frightened of this. So, yeah.
That's funny. I was right in the middle of that spectrum, because I'm like, oh, good, what's going to happen next? This is it's because it reminded me of a role playing adventure that went totally super wrong, right? Or totally right for one person on the ship.
Okay. Yeah.
But not everyone else. Anyway, so there's this era that and a certain range. It's not that I only watch things with Kate, but I frequently do. And, it's, of course, we're going to gravitate toward things that we have more common ground in. Anyway, so just a lot of my stuff is kind of older on this list. Let's see. And it's in a certain range. So yeah, my horror vocabulary doesn't go to Saw, right?
Mm-hmm.
I get curious and I consider, and I would interview someone who saw, right, and live vicariously through them to understand the reason someone would watch this and maybe glean, storytelling techniques. But I wouldn't want to firsthand go there. Anyway, oh gosh, it's hard to pick. So I'm going to start with a video game.
Okay.
Since you pitched a little bit.
Yeah.
So, and this is not a scary game, but it's spooky. Luigi's Mansion. It's a game where you get to, staying in the pitch focus here, you get to be Luigi, which is not as frequent. There's so much emphasis on Mario, but then you're Luigi and you're not this amped up, powerful. You're pretty capable, but like Mario like cruises around the world stomping on stuff and, acrobatically going amazing heights and flying and all kinds of stuff. Luigi has a vacuum on his back, but it's a pretty sweet vacuum because it can both pull and push and interact with the environment, which you're exploring all kinds of mystery and like hidden stuff that you're trying to essentially clear a space of ghosts, and the ghosts will mess you up if you're not sort of in the right rhythm with your ghost hunting vacuum cleaner and stuff. It's so it's a lot of fun creeping around a mansion and seeing what lurks behind the corners, what's inside all the different things, trash cans, paintings, dressers, what have you. And you're just constantly hoping you don't set something off that you're not ready for. And that's a neat that's a neat feeling as you cruise around as Luigi.
It reminds me, it's like a friendlier, like Luigi's Mansion looks like a friendlier version than one of my all-time favorite games, which was Resident Evil 2 for the PS1.
Yeah, a little different tone.
Yeah. But I mean, like the idea of like being in a spooky place and there could be something around the corner, and and like whatever version came out later where you could actually, like, it was first person and you could look around the whole environment and there was like zombies coming at you really fast. Like that's where I fell off. I'm like, yeah, I don't want the highly skilled twitchy kind of gaming. I like the exploration, and like the thing that I loved about Resident Evil, the at least the first and second one, was like you're in a room and the camera shot is static. You can't turn the camera and you hear something from the stereo speakers down and around the corner. Like you're like, it's like a shuffling noise. You're like, oh man, I'm gonna have to walk all the way down that hallway. If I turn that corner, it might be right there. That was, yeah. So like that.
Yeah. You didn't have the power of the camera. The camera was static, which puts it it becomes a narrative tool in that situation. And yeah, Resident Evil 1 had one of the most tense feeling things, and it was just it was when you open a door and there's a hallway with an L-shaped bend, but the camera's way up high, near the face of a crow looking down at you, who just shuffles a little bit. shuffles a little bit. It's a little, I'm like, ah, what's gonna happen?
And your
Like,
character has to get all the way down the hall, so like you're getting smaller and smaller away from the camera, so you can't quite see what your character's doing before the scene. Then when you make the turn, the scene shifts, and then you can see what that character sees. So it was brilliantly done, working with the limitations of the technology to make it so that it totally emphasized the suspense. I guess I'm kind of a sucker for suspense, less than the thrill of horrification. So
Mm.
Rachel Ross is in the chat and is talking about a game that I wanted to that I want to pull up on screen. Little Nightmares. Have you heard of this one, Rob?
I have heard of it. I've a friend of mine was incredibly excited about this game and kind of tracked it. And this is a situation where I'm happy to know someone who is learning about this and playing it, because I get to interview them and learn about the game without actually having to play it.
That was the other thing Rachel was saying in the chat. It's like watching playthroughs is like a really great way to experience these games without actually having to play them. And I'm a big fan of that. Oh, this does look creepy.
It's intensely creepy ambience, and just sort of the threat of overwhelming powerful environments and creatures within there, because you're this tiny character in a world of big dangerous things, with lots of shadows and stuff you can't see.
Neat. Okay. So, well, we got through 3 recommendations right there: Little Nightmares and Luigi's Mansion, and if you want to go back in time, Resident Evil 2. I have a very short animation that I watch every October that I may have mentioned on the podcast in years past, but it's been a while since we talked about spooky stories. You're familiar, Rob, I assume, with the UPA Telltale Heart?
I am, and I wonder if I learned about it from you.
I've taught this. I've used this cartoon in my classrooms for many years because I wouldn't say it's especially comic booky, but it's closer to comics than what we typically think of as animation, because they do so much with so little. Let me try to skip ahead in the video, so you can see that there's not much movement in it.
I think it was
but the
his
staging, the shading,
Yes,
the blocking,
that
the art
eye,
style, all of it contributes to it really
his eye
delivering the
staring.
tone of Edgar Allan Poe's
Milky
story.
white
We're all
film.
familiar with the story of the Telltale
The
Heart,
eye,
right? It's like the guy
everywhere,
who
in everything.
he's in the awards, and then he hears
Of
the
course
beating
I had
heart,
to get
and
rid of
it
the
drives
eye.
him up a wall, and he finally confesses to the murder. But
So I waited.
yeah, this version is narrated by James Mason
Watched.
too, on top of everything else.
Waited.
But you can just see,
I was
like,
never so
again,
kind to the old
it's
man.
it's
I looked
designed
after
to
him each
evoke a
minute, each
mood
second.
rather than represent.
And I waited.
Right? And it's clear that
But
they
night
have the
after night,
capability to animate
In
more
the
than what
hour
they're
of
doing.
the slowest
But
clock,
I think it's actually more effective because there's so
I
little
opened the
is
old
actually
man's
animated,
door.
if that makes sense. It feels more like a nightmare to me visually. So anyway, yeah,
The
you can
eye
find it on
was always
YouTube. We'll link to it in the
closed.
show notes. It's only like, I think
For
like
7 days I
what is it?
waited.
It's
You think
7
me
minutes
mad?
long.
What
It's a
madman
7 minute
would wait?
long,
Could
piece
wait
of
so
animation, but
patiently,
it's
so long.
it's a really chilling one.
The old house.
And it's just
With the old
and plus
man
it's James
and the
Mason.
eye that
Come on.
Oh yeah, and that's it's interesting. There does not have to be a lot of ingredients, or those ingredients don't have to be brought into high clarity and specificity for in order to trigger dread and fear, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and one can make the argument that it actually leaving more of it hidden is what triggers it, right? The mystery is what makes us feel fear. When the lights are out, you can't see it. That's what's so frightening. The example I always think of is the movie 8mm, which was a fine movie. It was okay. I liked it, but the monster was so well. If you do watch it, the monster is really cool until they show it, and then they show it, and it's like, oh, that's technically very well done, but now it was so much cooler in my imagination, right? And then I didn't have a picture in my head of what it was, right?
Oh, you didn't?
No, I don't know what I thought it was, but like the moment you see it and it becomes a thing, it becomes a noun instead of like whatever undifferentiated mass it is in your head when you're afraid of it, right? It's like it takes away some of the power of the image. And I feel like most stories with monsters, like scary stories with monsters, like that's always the drop off for me. Like almost every time, it's like same thing happened when I watched The Ring. That's the one with the VHS tape, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
haven't seen it.
It's really upsetting and disturbing the first like 2/3 of the way, and then like you finally see the thing at the end. And I'm like, oh, okay, I guess. It's like it's not quite as scary as I thought it was, but like, the premise is that all these people are dying because they watch this tape, right? And so you're like, what's on the tape? What happens at the end of the tape? And then you find out, you're like, oh, okay, that's creepy, but it's like way scarier what I didn't know, if that makes sense.
It really does. And I would imagine it's you're going from infinite fear to something specific you could take issue with and work around somehow. And that's interesting, because if there's no specific foothold to be like, oh, I know how I'd run away from that.
Yeah.
If the possibilities are so amorphous and infinite potential for overwhelming and saying there's no option to escape this. I wonder why, why is storytelling, like, we don't have to answer this right now, but I think it's interesting as a just open question. Why and what leads a storyteller to choose to get specific, and as opposed to leaving it ambiguous? And
and as I'm looking down my list of choices, a lot of the ones that I picked have a serious amount of dread and a high level of ambiguity, and I think that's why I like them so much. Which we're getting ahead of ourselves. We can pick that apart, tease that out a little bit more later on, but let's get to another one of your picks.
Oh, let's see. I remember seeing the movie The Thing way too young.
How young were you?
I would say it was probably 11 or 12.
Same. Yep.
Oh,
yeah.
Yep. And awesome movie.
It's a great movie, but it's tough for an 11-year-old to get through it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know. It's one of those that I imprinted on so deeply that I haven't seen it that many times since, honestly. Okay. And the whole gist of the thing is, so you have this well, a lot of everything is so famous and referred to, but in case you haven't or just want a refresher, you have a crew of explorers in the Arctic, and they encounter in a dig or construction, I forget why and how, but they encounter something weird under the ice, and it starts to cause a lot of issues with the team, because it's actually it's a creature of a sort, and there's first... a lot of trust that's like, so who's affected by this creature, and who makes it, who doesn't. That's the whole issue of the thing.
Yeah.
And they're stuck in the middle of the Arctic. They're like, what are you going to do?
There's no help. There's no way to go for help. And any one of us could be the monster, right? On that topic, there's a podcast that I really enjoy called the Tear Them Apart podcast by Evan Dorkin and oh shoot, I'm forgetting the other host's name. Oh, shame on me. But it's a horror movie podcast, and they did an entire retrospective on John Carpenter films, and they spent a lot of time talking about The Thing. So akin to it's called Tear Them Apart podcast.home.blog. We'll link to it in the show notes. But but I mean, it's listening to them sort of summarize the story is a way to, like, if you don't have time to watch it. Yeah, what are you gonna say, Rob?
So it's hosted by Evan Dorkin and Paul M. Yelovich.
Thank you. See, that's why there's two of us doing the show. But yeah, they're John Carpenter retrospective episodes. It was a two-parter, and they were really good because it was they just summarized the story and sort of react to what the merits as they see them are, and they have nothing but nice things to say about the thing. Because yeah, it's tough to make time to watch all these things, so it's nice to hear somebody like sum it up. And YouTube is a great resource for this. You can just like go to like do John Carpenter's The Thing summary, and there's like a dozen people who have done sort of like wrap up assessments of the story. But the great thing about it, yeah, the beginning of the film starts with this Arctic expedition, and they find I think it's a Norwegian expedition that is nearby. Like in the opening shot is they're like in a helicopter and they're shooting at a dog. They got machine guns. They're trying to kill this dog, and our heroes in the United States are like, what are you doing? You know, and they don't speak Norwegian, so the Norwegian's like, don't save the dog. It's not a dog. It's a monster. You know, but they don't understand them. So the helicopter gets blown up or something, and then they take the dog in. They let the monster into the house.
Right.
So, which is another thing I love that idea of, and this is like in Jaws too, is like you meet the person who met the monster, and you see like you get, yeah, I love that motif.
Yep. Right. And I remember now the flaws in my recollection of, I recalled a different portion of the movie. There are so many clever elements. Like I was fast forwarding to the whole like you don't know who the monster is, and who do you trust, and that's an interesting tense dynamic. The being isolated tense dynamic, but it's just made of some like the like willfully thinking you're helping, and that's you've invited doom, and
that's tough. That's really tough.
Yeah, a lot of clever dread in that, and I don't know why. Like I don't know. Like is 12? Yeah, 12. I don't know if I wasn't ready to fully appreciate it, but it scared the hell out of me.
Oh my god, yeah. The surgery scene, right? Like we all remember that. Like, yeah, that's.
Oh, yeah. The whole let's try to remove the ambiguity, because this is things have gone wrong now in this camp.
Yeah,
and so they're trying to verify like who on the team is affected.
Yeah, but the thing about that too is that like another brilliant thing about that movie is the monster has no form. It can take all sorts of forms. So like you never really know what the monster really looks like. So I think that's one of the reasons like I have such a fondness for that particular story. But it is visually it's very intense, and I think it pushes right to the edge of my line for gruesomeness. But I think it keeps on my side of the line by virtue of the fact that it is it's so rooted in science fiction fantasy. Even though the themes in it are very much about like, suspicion, tribalism. How do you trust people? What are the signals of trust, right? And how you can show up meaning well and let the doom in the front door kind of idea.
So. Well, we had that on both of us had that on our lists.
Mm-hmm.
So what's one quickie from your list that
and we'll take a break.
Because and I don't know. I'll mention one more too.
Okay. I want to
mention.
Oh, cool. Okay, and I'll mention a short story. So there's a short story by Ray Bradbury called "Come Into My Cellar," and it is the title alone already sets you up to like, what? But it takes place in the 1950s, and this little boy he's in comic books had like a little section in the back where it's like you could order all these different things. You could order, a boat. You could order a 6-foot tall Frankenstein monster. All these things you could order for like just like 20 cents in a self-addressed stamped envelope. And he orders these mushrooms, and the story starts with like people in town acting a little bit weird, and the boy's got these mushrooms in the basement that he keeps growing that he ordered from this comic book. And then the dad is our character that we're following. He figures out too late that the mushrooms are actually an alien species that people are ingesting and then getting taken over, Invasion of the Body Snatchers style. And the ending is so good because it's so it takes you right up to the edge of dread, like dread, 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 dread. And I'm not going to tell you what happens next. It's like that kind of ending. So like you get to fill in the blanks and how it ends. Oh my God, it's so good. So it's not a long story. It's easy to find. Come Into My Cellar by Ray Bradbury. What about you?
Let's see. It's a little tough to pick just one, but there's this whole era of anime that that I watched a little bit. Anime that would work in creepiness, because you'd have some that would have plots that were based in spookiness, but then you would have some that would just visit spookiness, right? So I'm going to cheat and mention two. So you've got like Witch Hunter Robin, set in with some mystery and magic and occult stuff. That is, you've got this talented young witch who is on a team of hunters, right? So fundamentally, using a witch to hunt witches, essentially. And that's Robin, the main character. So you've got a lot of interesting dynamics of like, well, how does a team trust this? They're hunting what she is, right? And why is she doing that hunting and stuff? So they explore a lot of interesting questions like that, and what's a lot of interesting mystery exploring the relationships, and like why does this organization exist and stuff like that, and the kind of enemies they encounter, which are always like, they're powerful and scary. So it stays in that sort of mysterious magical occult kind of stuff without going, it's not really gory and whatnot. So
Okay.
it's probably like rated TV 14 if I had to guess. And then one I have to mention because of a giant love for the series, but Cowboy Bebop always has elements of the like creepiness, putting something grotesque next to cute and all this kind of juxtaposition stuff, and a mix of dark emotion and humor. But like they have a couple episodes, and one in particular, Sympathy for the Devil, where there is a lot of it reminds me of these characters stumbling into some kind of mysterious power that is past their abilities. It's like kind of Twilight Zone-ish. It's kind of it's got this combination of horror plus action movie plus mystery that is and then always intertwined is this emotional through line in Cowboy Bebop that has to do with the tone and the music, right? And it's a recipe for a good mysterious, creepy adventure. And so you get to see this party of characters, you go on this, a variety of adventures, some more funny than others, but this one is a creepy one.
Cool. That's always fun too. Yeah, when you have like really capable adventurers get into the realm of like secret occult / supernatural / cabal kind of thing. Yeah. That's always fun to see the characters tested that way. Rachel's in the chat saying, spooky anime, I love Mushishi. He is a traveling kind of doctor that solves diseases caused by supernatural bacteria. It's creepy, but kind of full of wonder. Mushishi, I've heard of that one.
Sounds cool.
One more TV one, I guess, and then we can take a break, is, and this has been a tradition of mine for years now, is Saturday nights, Ann and I watch Svengoolie on MeTV, if you have it in your area. And it's just like one of those like horror host TV series, but like he always gets like really odd B-movie monster films, like this Saturday, The Devil Doll is playing. But and then he'll also do like the very classic like Universal monster movies, and then there's like he does little bits in between where he like gives you a little bit of history about the movie, does a few little jokes and songs and bits and puppet shows and things like that. It's definitely very PG in the way it's done, but it's a way for me to check in on, you know, some monster movie that I haven't checked out yet, like the Mole People. I think it's the Mole People. I'd never seen it before. I'd heard of it, but I never watched it until I saw it in Svengoolie. So Svengoolie.com if you want to find out where it is on your local station. So
yeah, I've been curious about that. You've mentioned your sort of like fun ritual and all that stuff around Svengoolie, and it just seems like that kind of tone of like, hey, let's go to this playful, creepy place, not necessarily it's, I would imagine that the kind of like a Svengoolie evening probably doesn't lead to nightmares.
No, because a lot of the movies, like there's some, he plays some that are like genuinely, I would say, spooky, but he never plays like really truly frightening movies. As a matter of fact, like a lot of them are profoundly silly, right? Like Dracula versus Billy the Kid, right? I mean that's a real movie that. So
that really speaks to a time. In a lot of ways, it's like there's an industry that would fund a project and a audience with the imaginations of like, okay, I got to combine all my things that are fun. All right, well, we got like lasers and wizards, Star Wars, that's coming in the future. Can't wait, whatever. For now, we've got Billy the Kid and Dracula.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
So there's a lot of stuff like that, right? Like, and a lot of them are like really doing their level best to say something in the story, but like it's just the technology isn't there yet, or the sensibility is like a little bit off beat or something like that. So most of the time they're very. And
I don't mean to be like, I'm an ironic T-shirt guy right now saying like look at me, I hate it. Look, I'm wearing the shirt. No, I mean, there's something about that. Like anytime, like it is like on the surface, holy wow, that's okay. You got problematic cowboy fantasy stuff, right? Mixed with, a fairly iconic classic, reusable because, outside of copyright, Dracula, right?
Right.
It's that kind of thing goes on right now. Like, I mean, in a show like so even like that Cowboy Bebop episode, I could probably ironic shirt it, right? That, oh, look at, they took this trope and that trope and, but I think that's interesting. We're always doing that for our stories and juxtaposing stuff. It just that's kind of it's kind of funny. Like,
yeah. No, I mean, it's like, yeah, that was when I told Ann that week, she's like, well, what's on Svengoolie this week? I'm like, oh, it's Dracula versus Billy the Kid. She's like, oh my gosh, I'm there. It's like, in a very genuine and loving way. This is going to be profoundly silly, but we're going to watch these actors chew up the scenery, trying to do a good job of this. And John Carradine as Dracula is something to see. Okay, so how about we take a break and then we'll talk about some of the meta behind all of these different things that we've talked about today. Sound good?
Sounds excellent.
All right, everybody, we will be back in 1 minute and 30 seconds to talk about like why do these things appeal to us. And for those of you who've been sharing some different pics of your own in the chat, feel free to chime in with some ideas as to what's the whyness behind why you like these things. Before we do that, though, we have to thank some people who make this show possible, and those are the people who support us on Patreon. Patreon.com/leanintoart is the website. What is it? It's a way for you to support us on an ongoing basis. If you believe in what Rob and Jerzy are putting together week after week on this project called Lean Into Art, you can support us for as little as $1 a month, and I want to thank some people who've been doing that on an ongoing basis. Mike White. Thank you, Mike. You can find Mike on Instagram at Mike White Robot. And Stephen Stone Bush. Thank you, Stephen, for believing in us and what we do. And Dave Sri Say. You can find Dave Sri Say on Twitter at Dave Say. We're big fans of Dave. David Armantrout, thank you, David, for believing in us and what we do. And Dado, who you can find on Twitter at Dadotronic. You can join them all at patreon.com/leanintowart, where you'll find all the shows we make, as well as the extra leans, the shows we record monthly only for people who support us on Patreon. Those posts become an open mic thread where you can talk about whatever you want. Speaking of talking about whatever you want, it also gets you access to the Patreon-only section of the Lean Into Art Discord, which is linked in the show notes for this episode and every episode. We'll talk more about it a little bit later, but patreon.com/leanintowart is the website. You can cancel anytime. You can do a one-time donation, but we sincerely appreciate all the people who have been supporting us on an ongoing basis. Patreon.com/leanintowart. Thank you to everybody there. It means a lot to us.
It really does. Thank you so much.
Okay, see if do I have anything that sounds scary? Well, I guess this is kind of,
Yeah.
I mean, the track is called Catastrophe. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if this were playing in the background and you had the Resident Evil crow, I'd be like, I think it's a space zombie around the corner.
Those Resident Evil crows. I mean, you really only encounter them, like, I think one time in the game where they actually do anything, and the rest of the time they're just there to say, like, something scary is going to happen. Are you ready? I hope you're ready. Something scary. It might be around that corner. Nope, not around that corner. Not around that one. Maybe in the next one. Go through that door. And then watch the transition animation while you slowly ascend the stairs. Clunk, clunk, clunk. And then the door will open. Then it fades from black to the scene. Oh, I'm in a room full of 3 zombies, and I've got 2 bullets.
Those are clever. The due to the hardware limitations, like what an excellent adaptation, like embracing a constraint of a platform.
Yeah.
Right. The two different things you mentioned are the locked in camera angles, right? And because the backgrounds at the time, they were pre-rendered. And so you had essentially something that would like an art asset that would have been generated on a, like an expensive workstation or a server, and then it gets loaded into the game as it's not polygons and textures and lighting and all that stuff. It is, like a bigger computer could do that another time. It's essentially a static image. It's a bitmap.
Yeah.
And then you have simpler polygons, moving on the screen, your characters, maybe the head or portions or even the full body of the crow, but like positioned. So all of a sudden you've convincingly have this composition that adds up to a convincing looking scene. That's amazing. A bunch of embracing constraints, but the dang CD needing to load what happens next, instead of it being the like, oh no, what's going to happen? And then you're taken out of it. They keep you in because whatever that transition is, they'll have a pre-rendered sequence of frames with some sound.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
That is opening a door, turning a corner, walking down, upstairs, all that's, they keep you in while the silly system is doing its job loading something, and it becomes its own like really specific art that's accomplishing its goal really well.
So when I bought my PlayStation 1, it's always been a very similar trigger with all the systems I buy. It's like one game that I absolutely must play, and okay, I'll ship it. I'll pay whatever it costs to get the system. I haven't gotten a Switch yet because that one game hasn't happened yet. But for the PS1, there was a Beast Wars game, Beast Wars Transformers. And I was like, I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's a bad game or not. It's Beast Wars. I got to have it. I went and bought a PlayStation. And then I was looking on the shelf. I'm like, oh, what's that zombie game? And the guy behind the counter is like, yeah, it's a really popular zombie game. You'll really like it. I'm like, okay, I guess I'll get that too. And I played Beast Wars. It was a bad game. It wasn't fun to play. It was so like they didn't get the voice actors for it. The polygons were it was like low resolution. And like the actual missions, like it wasn't clear what you were really doing all the time. And then the load times, this is my first time playing a CD-ROM game. So I'm like, it was just like all of a sudden there's a picture of Megatron. And it's like loading, I'm like, are you kidding me? I got to sit here and look at the static image while it loads. CD-ROM games kind of suck. And then I popped in Resident Evil. And I'm like, oh my gosh. They worked around all of those limitations to make something really genuinely immersive. And I was so lucky when I played that game because I was like 20, I want to say I was like 21 or 22. And I lived with a bunch of friends, in a big house full of people. So like and when you're that age and you're working whatever job you're working, I had the bandwidth to be up at like 4:00 in the morning with the lights down with all my buddies. Like, so like when the thing happens, we all scream,
Yeah. That's, I would totally do, essentially couch, controller take turns with friends and hang out and play that game in the dark for hours on end. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, and so I think there is a very specific time-ishness to some kinds of horror experiences and some kinds of spooky experiences, that, like, I think the reason that someone someone would make The Thing, not The Thing, the movie, but make that kind of creative work. I mean, it's like, well, what, like, They Live, right? So we didn't talk about They Live, but like, I have the DVD. It's been ages since I've watched it, and I started watching it again. It's been so long since I watched it. I don't think I watched my DVD ever. Like, this is the first time I'm actually using this piece of media. I just never got around to it. And again, like, one of the, like, so many different imprints and stuff, like, in a way I don't need to watch it, but like, I forgot about the whole premise in the start of it, where it's like, it's so like, it's class warfare is what's going on in there, is the context. And I'm like, well, I could really see someone watching or writing a They Live again, right? For essentially, what in the heck, I don't know what they would do, like, to make a 2020 They Live, but I could see, like, that kind of outlet, like, writers needing to express these ideas still today. And I'm like, which is a huge bummer that we haven't made the progress. Where They Live isn't quaint, right? Where it's like, oh, that's dark,
No, it's super unfortunate how relevant that story feels, right? The quaintness is in Roddy Piper's character, right? Like, because like they take the situation that feels so relevant today, and they just put, like, let's put a muscly guy who solves problems with a shotgun in the middle of it. It's like, okay, that feels very of its time, right?
Well, he's quick to judgment. He's slow to learn.
Yeah.
Muscly and shotgunny.
And there's something cathartic about the scene in the bank. That's why that line is so memorable. I'm here to kick butt and chew bubble gum, and I'm all out of bubble gum. Like that feels like, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could solve our problems that way? Actually, it wouldn't be great if we could solve our problems that way, because he goes on a murder spree. But you feel it, like your primitive brain, like, reacts to that, right? And of course the fight with Sam Keith in the alleyway, put on the damn glasses, which goes on for 11 minutes or something like that. And what
Sam Keith, David Keith,
David Keith, sorry, Sam Keith is the max. But like, what I love about that is, like, that it didn't glamorize the fight. Like, in this weird turn, like, John Carpenter says, like, okay, let's do like the thing, let's like the 80s movie where he's like blasting the place up with a shotgun and like punching out aliens left and right. But then in the alleyway, we're going to show just how awful a fight really feels. And you feel it, like, every time they hit the ground. They're doing wrestling moves and stuff, but like, it's dirty, it's gritty, and it just doesn't feel pleasant. It feels like it goes on forever. So, but I mean, what's the aboutness? Sure. The aboutness is, like, it's about media literacy, right? And propaganda, and how we can be lulled into false securities and persuaded into inaction through media.
Absolutely. It's it's really expertly crafted, even though it's I don't understand how storytellers can make such a simple-ish seeming mechanism with this approachable layer on top of, WrestleMan, like just not ready to analyze and understand the world and what's going on, but it's kind of just bumping into it, and like, but like we're getting taught along the way about these factors and like the outcome, the dangers, and then like the key mechanism of that media literacy being sort of the, hey, what if you did this and you could, avoid these other problems and stuff. And that's I don't know. I admire that when writers pull that off, because
And
it's easy to just be overly specific and pedantic or too explicit.
Yeah. No, and that's one of the reasons I love John Carpenter films so much, is because another one we didn't talk about, but I put it on my list knowing that I'm not going to talk about it in this episode in great length because I've talked about it a zillion times elsewhere, is The Prince of Darkness, which is like probably my number one scary movie of all time. And he does it in that, and he does it in They Live. Is the story starts out with a relatively normal situation, in that he's like an unemployed construction laborer who's just looking for work in Los Angeles or wherever. But as he walks through the city, we see these little tiny pieces of weird things where you don't know why. Like you see this like pastor who is preaching about how, the enemy is hidden in plain sight, and you have to look to see him. And then and like that it cuts to a television with this man with glasses who's talking about like, he's like, we're interrupting this transmission because the enemy is all around us. And then all of a sudden the preacher starts mouthing the words that the man on the television is saying, and they're in two different locations, and like, it's just a quick little second, and he doesn't hang on it, but it just gives you these little pieces of an unease. Like, okay, there's the world, and these little tiny things happening that just like, we go, what's that? That's weird. And like, I feel like that's so true to what makes us feel uncomfortable. Like when you're in a town you don't know, and you're walking at night and you see something like just dimly under the street lamp, and you can't make out what it is. Is that a trash can, or is that a bear, or is that something else? It's like, I don't know. Like everything feels normal, but there's one thing that's setting off my my fear reaction. So he does that really well too.
But like weaving in the hidden danger and the environmental obvious dangers too,
Yeah.
of like, well, okay, maybe there's a shadowy murder bear right there that you discover, and it's surprising, but then why is the murder bear there, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah
and that's
Prince of Darkness does this really well too. Like there's this moment where Donald Pleasance, oh come on, Donald Pleasance is the greatest. And he's this priest, and he's walking to his church, and this homeless woman walks up to him, and she says, "It's so wonderful that you're opening back the church back up." And then her voice like dips low, like you can hear them on the soundboard pitching it down. And then as she lowers her head and starts kissing his hand, she says, "Bringing back the church," and she kisses his hand, and then you see she's holding the cup, and in the cup are a bunch of worms, and then she walks away. And it's like, okay, well, that was weird. What was that all about? It's like, but then he doesn't spend any more time on it. It's like, just to give you that little touch of, okay, something weird is happening. It's enough to set you at ill at ease, and plus his soundtracks are always incredible too. But, and The Thing does that too. But to go back to something we hinted at in the first half that I find really compelling about his stories is, how does The Thing end, right? Do we need to put a spoiler warning on a movie that's 30 odd years old? Maybe.
I'd say if we're spoiling the story, it's worth.
Yeah. Okay.
I would say yes.
Skip ahead 30 seconds. It ends with Kurt Russell and one other guy in the snow. The base is burnt to the ground, and neither of them know if the other one has the entity in them, right? And it just pulls back, right? And that's the end. How does Prince of Darkness end? We never see the monster, right? The monster is there, like in plain sight all the time, possessing people left and right, but you never see what it actually looks like. You see its hand for a second when it's getting pulled out of its dimension, but then the mirror gets shattered, everything seems to be all right, and then there's this recurring element of this dream that people have from the future, right? That's being transmitted into their dreams, because in the dream that they all have, they hear the dialogue. We can't transmit this to you in your conscious mind because there's too much interference in your thoughts. So we have to do this while you're sleeping. And the dream is always showing that in the year 199, and they never say the last number, this entity, this creature has come to Earth, and it's bad, right? And they think they stopped it, and then our main character has that dream again, wakes up, and walks to the mirror, gets ready to touch it, and then it just ends, right? Like that kind of stuff. And that Into the Night, or Come Into My Cellar by Ray Bradbury has a very similar kind of ending, where it's like, let's take you right up to the edge of this terrible dread and not, let you fill in the ending, ... question mark. I love that. That is so much more haunting to me than actually showing me the monster and tying up the story.
Well, questions are powerful, and it's not that, questions can have the potential to be powerful. And I think you get this premise presented in whatever is robust and compatible and interesting to you way of presenting a spooky or scary story. And you're like, okay, you're feeding me all these pieces and whatnot, but then and then I wonder, it's like, how does that story deal with the questions it opens up? Is essentially is it all sort of building anticipation, like a YouTube unboxing video, right? Where finally, does the video end with, do you get to see what's in the box, or not, right? And I think that's a pivotal thing as far as your own tastes, and I do feel like probably we get to see more monster unboxing than not. And I would imagine that's probably a market-driven thing. But I wonder,
probably.
Is it an untested assumption that just feels like the right practice in the business of storytelling?
Because my understanding is that Carpenter's films did not do that great when they were released in theaters. So I do have to wonder if that is part of, if it is a market-driven thing. And like they become classics later, but in the moment they were not, beloved. So
I wonder if I suppose there are things like director's cuts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where in some ways it's like, this was not meant to be exactly this, but it was more, market compatible, and let me fix that monster unboxing or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder. That's I'm just thinking off the exploring the question. Not that I have a specific example, but like you've done a pretty good exploration as far as like, well, like what do you find compelling? And it feels like a lot of it is that sort of setup without a lot of like hyper specificity, right? What makes it plausible? What makes it like what tempts you? Like, there's a fork in the road and it's like, do something else or scary story, right?
Yeah.
What makes that fork? What makes you turn down the scary path?
I'm very attracted to religious and fantastical premises. Things that operate more properly in the realm of mythology. Like The Prince of Darkness, for those who haven't seen it, I mean, it's literally about Satan. It's about the devil coming to Earth by way of a incubation chamber that's older than the human race, right? It's like millions and millions of years old, and it's this like tube of glass with this spinning green liquid that these the Brotherhood of Sleep, this secret group of monks, have hidden for a long time, and now it's stirring and it's awakening, and Satan's coming, right? And so there's something already like kind of elevated and I would say implausible about that premise to start with, right? So like films like Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, not for me. Movies about home invasion, about abduction, about body horror, about things like that. Actually, Cronenberg movies, as elevated as those are, not for me. I tried watching The Fly with Jeff Goldblum. I'm like, this is like a little bit too visually intense, And I think I like the promise and the implication of inevitable dread, but that's what appeals to me. And then when I show up, I want to have lots of room for speculation, and I don't necessarily want you to tell me what the answer is, right? They Live has an ending that has a very clear resolution of the story, but I feel like that one is so saved by the fact that the ending is so 80s action movie, and it even ends with Roddy Piper giving the finger to the camera. It's so absurd and over the top. It feels like it's almost like a punchline. And again, it's a catharsis because it's like taking down, big media, whatever. But when I think of the other ones that I really like The Fog, The Thing, Prince of Darkness, even Come Into My Cellar, some of my favorite Twilight Zone episodes. I love the Twilight Zone. The monsters are due at Maple Street. We all know that story, right? It's like that small suburban town where the lights start flickering and then like they don't know what it is. And instead of like trying to put their heads together and collaborate and cooperate to solve the problem, they all turn on each other. And it doesn't have a resolution. It doesn't end with any kind of like, well, we sure learned something about this. It's just more like it just ends with pulling back and you're just listening to the chaos of the town, There's something like, I guess like the what is the word for that? Entropy, right? It's a story about like, it almost feels like a story about entropy or the ongoing tension between order and entropy, and there's no victory. That's an oscillation that just happens. That feels, even though the stories are elevated, something feels very true about that statement, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think like a lot of different themes and genres can accomplish that kind of I guess seed of a premise, right? Because like entropy versus order is probably not going to win a pitch meeting, right? But like as like this extra like this boost of saying that like I don't know, somehow like danger exists, things that are unknowable that can appear, and we can see other characters safely. Well, I'm safe, they're not. I can from my safe distance, I can experience the scenario and problems and issues and maybe failures, maybe solutions of these characters, dealing with well, the results of like let's see, a corporation that is trying to militarize and maybe even control the world with some kind of thing that ends up creating zombies, like the Umbrella Corporation in Resident Evil, which I actually like. I need to go back. I think I've seen 3 of the movies, but I haven't seen them all in the Resident Evil movie series. And that some of that encapsulates a bit of the like the themes that make scary and spooky palatable. Like I like when we have a team or discover ability to battle the spooky, right?
Yeah.
And that's where, I mean, in Resident Evil, the main character discovers an ability to fight, and that's turns out it's pretty necessary. So something in there, right? And then mixed with probably not too much gore, but like I want there to be stakes. It's like I don't want characters to die, but they need to, right? And it keeps it interesting and stuff. Like there's like one of the characters is like one of my favorite characters in the first Resident Evil movie, like is gets in over their head. And I love to be. I'm not spoiling a darn thing. So
Yeah.
go ahead and check me for spoilers. I got none on me.
But yeah,
it's a
that's I was thinking of the movie Train to Busan, which I think we talked about in a Read Watch Play episode recently, which was like, boy, that was a mistake to watch in the middle of a pandemic. Are you familiar with this movie?
No.
It's a zombie movie that takes place on a train. It's a Korean movie. So you're on a bullet train heading to Seoul, and a zombie gets out of somebody who's infected with the zombie bite gets on the train. And now the train can't stop because the outbreak is happening in all these towns that it's passing through. Or no, the train's actually it's train to Busan. It's not heading to Seoul. It's heading to Busan. But so like the conductor is calling ahead, going like, "We got to get these people off this train. There's like cars full of zombies now." And they're like, "No, you can't stop here. There's a zombie outbreak here too." And they're like the fast zombies and everything. But they do the trick that they do in these kinds of stories, which is you make one character who is so deeply lovable. They are so everything you would admire in a person in this kind of crisis. And like, oh yeah, they're going to get eaten. And they're going to get eaten hard. And they're going to get eaten in a way that is really tragic. And it's so right for their character. They have to do it. They have no other choice but to do this thing. But when you see it coming, you know, like Anne was sitting next to me and she's grabbed my arm. She's like, no, not him. I'm like, yeah, he's going to go. He has to. That's the structure of these stories. And I don't want to watch it either. I love this guy, you know, but like when it happens, you're like, oh my gosh. Yeah. So, but that's part of the emotional ride of that kind of story, right?
Yeah. I mean, writers are, I mean, they may like you, but they want to hurt you. Yes. So, and I say this, you know, I do like to write. I'm working on some stories, and so I get that sense where I'm like, I get this writer haunting, like, oh no, there's a writer decision I'm detecting.
Yeah,
they're gonna do it to me, aren't they?
Oh yeah, and when they do it good, when they do it really well, it's like you could see it coming, and it still hurts. Like you just got caught off guard, like you got slapped in the face by it, right? It almost makes it worse because you can see it coming. Like there's this part where he's preparing to do something, and he turns to some other people that he cares about, and he starts telling them, like, okay, you got to go over here, you got to go over here, you got to do this, and you smell it in the water, like, oh, he's gonna die. Oh, and then you like start drinking in this last moment you have with this character, like, oh, I just want to cherish everything about you before you go do this really wonderful, noble thing that is going to be ultimately tragic for you, you know. But in those kind of stories, I also find Prince of Darkness, I think, falls into this camp too, where you're watching a group of people cope with an impossibly bad situation and see who rises up and who falls apart, right? And in a zombie movie, you almost always have, or not almost always, I shouldn't say this, I'm not a scholar on zombie movies, but I've noticed this pattern of there's somebody who is a complete butthead, right? Like they're in it, they're responding to everything out of fear. They're not collaborative. They're just waiting for their chance to like bug out and leave everybody in the lurch, right? And in Train to Busan, there is this truly just vile human being who like takes teenagers and throws them into the horde to buy himself time. You know, he is such a reprehensible, disgusting human being, and his ending is really, really good. The way they deal with his character arc at the end, you're like, oh, I don't have sympathy for you. I have a lot of pity for you though, and you're just a horrible human being, and you kind of deserve what's happening. But at the same time, I see now, I have a bigger picture on why you were so reprehensible. So, because that's another thing, I don't feel like you can spoil zombie movies. this is a couple people are gonna live. That's usually the way they go, right? And then even in like the case of which was that remake they did in like 2007 or 2008, which was like Day of the Dead. Was that what it was?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like that one.
Dawn of the Dead?
Dawn of the Dead. I think that was what it was. And that one, like,
because Day of the Dead was the sequel. And yes, I watched those growing up. I think I even had Dawn of the Dead on Laserdisc. But,
whoa.
I know. I'm messing around. But what were you thinking about that remake?
Oh, just that it ends, and then they do that tricky thing after the credits where it's like, oh, okay, whew, that was a tough story, and then it's like, oh, wait for it, and like, oh no. So that's fun too. But and Shaun of the Dead, which is a zombie comedy, I'm sure you saw that.
I did too, actually.
That one's pretty good.
Interesting. Pretty good. Plenty of like, it's talk about weaving in themes and different sort of tastes and palettes and stuff. It's like, that's not like a in tone, it has so many comedic elements.
Mm-hmm.
It has a bit of irony, but it's a horror movie.
Yeah.
And it does a good job. And
it has a ton of heart in it, right? Like there's like a lot of like really, I would say, genuine and authentic emotional moments in the story, for something that's so absurd.
Yeah. And so that's another kind of I guess that's the thing too. It's like when there's enough of those elements, and I get really satisfied when there's some surprise in how it happens. Because I guess you're right. It's a little bit like Columbo. You see the murder, or you see the crime. You know what happens. You know who did it.
Right.
It's just a matter of how's it going to play out. So
yeah. Yeah, I would say very much so. I mean, like in a monster movie too, it's like they're either going to stop the monster or they're not going to. You know, it's a pretty straightforward idea. So then it's like, okay, well, how are they going to do it? So yeah, and like I said, I look for ambiguity and implication and promise, and I tend to get hooked on the ones that have like an inevitable kind of dread looming over the whole thing. Like there's no way it can get any better for these people. It's just impossible, right? And it's not important to me that they get out of it in a clear way. Halloween 3 is another one like that, right? I don't know if you remember Halloween 3.
Season of the Witch?
Season of the Witch, yeah, which was like the non-Michael Myers one. Some people don't like it because of that, but that ending is pretty darn good, I think.
I need to rewatch it. Saw it when I was young, didn't see it again.
Silver Shamrock.
That's the one with the Halloween masks?
Yeah,
right? Yeah. Well, that's stuck in my head at least.
Oh. Did we walk around the topic?
We did. It's we had a lot of great mentions in the chat, reactions and stuff. So this is, I think a lot of people care about the spookiness, right? So
yeah, I guess so. So maybe this is something we can revisit again. After October, because I'm going to be, soaking up all the monster movies all this month. Have something to say afterwards. Like another one that's like a staple every year is the Colossus of New York, which is not a great movie, but it is an interesting sort of meditation on transhumanism, because it's about a doctor, a very, very well-respected surgeon who gets hit by a car. He's going to die, and his dad is this brilliant roboticist who puts his brain inside of a robot body. And so it's like silly 1950s science fiction, as silly 1950s science fiction goes, but like there's this idea of where does the you-ness end, right? Is it just the brain and the brainstem? Or if you take away everything else, is something lost, right?
Yeah, that's a good really related concept, because a lot of it, I mean, you're dealing with mortality, you're dealing with decay and undesirable change, through big and small events that and then it's like, well, how can you face them? Is your ability to face them removed? There's a lot of things that would suck, and horror, like scary and spooky stories, are able to either gently or super aggressively put you in those situations. And I like a little spice, but not too spicy. I like a lot of spice in my food, but not too much spice in the monster scary stuff. Just a little.
Yeah, same here. All right. Cool. So how about we take one more break, and we'll come back and check in on our 2-minute practice, and then we'll call it a day. What do you say?
Sounds great.
All right. So in about minute 30, 2 minutes, we'll come back to talk about what we're practicing for next week. But first, we got to thank some more people who make the show possible. Those people are us. We make the show possible. And the thing that I make that I hope you will check out, the holiday season is upon us, and everybody's thinking about what do I get for the people that I care about? Whether you celebrate, Christmas, Hanukkah, solstice, you name it. This is a time we're heading into that time of year. And so this is a time for me to remind you that I make comic books. And I make comic books for young children. And so you can find them at my website, jdros.com. You can find Science Comics Rockets, which is the history and science of rockets as told by the animals who participate in rocket history. It's a very funny book that will teach you how rocket physics work. And then there's also my fantasy stuff like Boulder and Fleet, Adventures for Hire, Mining for Trouble, which you can find 90-something odd page graphic novel about animals doing people things and high adventure. But then also you can find the Warren Commission report there, which is a comics documentary about the Kennedy assassination. So if you're a history buff, or if you know a history buff in your life who you want to get something nice for, it's there, jdros.com, and you just follow the link that says, buy my books. So, Rob, you got a thing. You make stuff.
Yeah. I have a store with a variety of products and things things I make and sell and services as well. So I do creative process coaching and a variety of flavors of that, whether it's, for you individually or for your teams, you want to incorporate some user-centered design things into your work. Go to robstenzinger.com/store.html, and you can find all about that, whether it's choosing a career path. The next thing you make as a creative, a maker of stories and independent professional, well, that's part of your career path. And it's interesting. We did an episode of Lean Into Art podcast where I did a coaching session with Jerzy exploring that kind of thing. And so get in touch with me. We can set up some sessions and help you explore what you're doing next. But then for something that's just sort of, come in, check it out, some good learning experiences to solve a variety of problems with your creative projects. Two workshops I want to recommend checking out are drawing user journey maps. That is a huge help booster superpower thing for helping you see a project from a wider set of perspectives and including yourself and the members of your team with different hats. Things like considering the system aspect of what you're making and how it connects with your audience, and considering them as they go through, before they learn about your thing and when they're first learning about your product or service, and then on through getting to experience it more while you create a user journey map. And it's a really helpful planning and problem solving tool and collaborating tool. Another thing that is really good for this time of year, Jerzy mentioned the gift giving, and maybe you use creative challenges to help you get through the process of making stuff for other folks. You can use it for a variety of things. And that's what this workshop is all about, customizing your next creative challenge. You can make it and tune it. Well, like we were talking about, like scary and spooky things in the podcast main episode here. Well, maybe you like really hard challenges that you don't know how they're going to end. And that's something you can be really purposeful about and find a way to design it in a way that works for you, for the experience you want and for the outcomes you're seeking for your next creative challenge, instead of just sort of taking it like as it is off the shelf. Make it work for you. And that's, all that stuff is available at robstenzinger.com/store.html.
That's awesome. Thanks, Rob. And then the last thing we hope you'll check out is the Lean Into Art Discord. Yes, we have a forum now where you can interact with us in between shows in a time-shifted way. And so instead of all comments being rooted to the specific video stream that we did, you can talk about other things in a time-shifted way. And there's a special Patreon section where you can post, just things about that are happening to you or happening in your life, like a social channel. But then there's also a channel for challenges and quests, and this is where you can post things that you're doing for the 2-minute practice, which we're going to talk about next. So the link to the Lean Into Art Discord is in the show notes for this episode and every episode at leanintoart.com. All right. And I will say for the user journey maps thing, I mean, I'm using that right now as a way to, when I'm reporting back to the people I work with at CXC to sort of tell the story of our festival. How do we reflect on this big thing that just happened to us? Well, let's look at it from the perspectives of the constituencies that we're attempting to serve. Like, what was a success story from the perspective of an attendee, and what principles did we arrive at in order to understand what success even looks like for an attendee? So if you are a person who has to work with other people and has to explain to them the value of the thing that you're all making together, the user journey maps approach that Rob has in his store is very, very valuable. It will equip you with some very empathetic ways to get people on board with your thing.
Thanks, Jerzy. That's awesome to hear. It's easy to sort of evaluate success based on I mean, it's not easy. I mean, you've worked to build the skills you have for the role you have on your team and your organization. And so of course you evaluate stuff based on like, well, I'm on the marketing team, or I'm on the engineering team, or I'm on this team or that team. And this, the user journey map approach purposely helps you take one another's perspectives, and especially the perspective of the point of view of people in your audience. Maybe it's, even if it's one point of view of someone that's outside your organization that benefits from what you're putting into the world, it gets you out of that sort of maybe incredibly powerful and useful, likely incredibly powerful and useful set of ways that you evaluate decisions and collaborate. And it includes more, right? So it's just a helpful way to include each other in deciding, like, well, how something went. That's a cool thing that you mentioned too, looking back, and especially, well, for what you might do next, because then you can think, well, oh, at this particular point in the journey, this is where we experienced, the more things that we wanted to go differently. We wanted it to go better. So, hey, let's put some time and attention on that to make it different.
Yeah. Okay, so let's check in on the 2-minute practice. What are we doing and reporting on next week?
Well, there was in the chat, was it Sarah Lautfi?
Yeah.
If I'm okay, mentioned like, let's make color palettes, and it seemed like such a what a perfect thing to, like, you can take a picture and get some colors out of it and now have a color palette. And if that goes quickly for you, well, what are your thoughts about that color palette? Does it seem like a good fit for this thing or that thing, or how does it feel when you look at that color palette? So how's it going so far for you? Or do you want to check in at all?
Well, the idea occurred to me, when it was first proposed, it's like, well, autumn is upon us. This is a time where, like, there's a lot of color in the world, at least in the northern hemisphere. So this is an opportunity to grab some interesting color palettes. But then as I thought about it, I was like, well, there's also, it's Halloween. I'm setting up my yard decorations. I'm going to take some snapshots of that and, like, grab some colors off of that and see what kind of spooky palette I can get. And I also thought, well, why limit myself to photographs? Let's also go to some... I do this other podcast called The 4 Million Years Later Show, where I spend a lot of time talking about some Transformers cartoons with my buddy Hoover. And a lot of my show prep is grabbing screen grabs of interesting compositions from the show. Anybody who's listened to it has heard me go on and on about, like, the framing and the composition and all that. And so I was like, wow, I've got this huge bank of screen grabs. I wonder what color palettes I can grab from those too. So I've been doing all of those, and yeah, it's been a fun sort of, like, low, emotionally and time-wise inexpensive way to acquaint myself with color in a thoughtful way that I don't give myself the room to typically. So that's where I'm at.
That's really that's what I was. I'm just really thankful. Like, the 2-minute practice is all about making it easy to try new kinds of things and I don't know, revisit, get new perspective on things that you haven't practiced in a while. And this color palette thing is it is an ongoing tool. Like I'll visit it sometimes with projects, doing some planning. What kind of feel do I want for this? But then it's kind of like, well, I solved the color palette problem, and I don't visit it till another project comes up or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is neat where you just get to live with the color palettes. And yeah, I'll share more details. I've been experimenting with different ways of like there's apps that let you just extract a color palette from an image automatically. And yeah, so I've been using that approach, but now I'm going to try the manual approach too.
Cool. And we'll talk about it in length or at length in the next episode. So you have one more week, everybody, to participate in this 2-minute practice. And for those of you who are part of the Lean Into Art Discord, this is one of our public channels, so you can go post your results in challenges _quests. So, all right. Hey, thank you, Rob. This was a fun one to do.
Thanks, Jerzy. I like this topic a lot. Appreciate you have a surprising amount of for the rated G aspect of your style and service that you bring to the world. You've got a lot of ideas and experience in this space. So
that's fun. Cool. All right. Well, anybody else wants to thoughts, questions, comments? We're going to have some social links that happen at the end of the show. We record this weekly on Thursdays, and we stream it live on Discord and YouTube and Facebook and what's the other one? Twitch. And then we collect it as a podcast at leanintoart.com and patreon.com/leanintoart. We'll be back next week with another one. Until then, I have been Jerzy Drozd of leanintoart.com, Jerzy Drozd on Instagram.
And I've been Rob Stenzinger of leanintoart.com and places. I'm Rob Stenzinger all over the place, like Instagram.
Okay. Bye.
Show notes for this episode can be found at leanintoart.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at the user leanintoart, and you can reach us via email at leanintoart@gmail.com. And remember, leaners aren't wieners. Thanks for listening.